So we in the security community, we have this list of application vulnerabilities, and we get either a scan or a pen test that comes back and go, oh, it's cross-site scripting.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. I see that alert box, so it must be cross-site scripting. Check here, cross-site scripting, handing it to the dev. Dev says, what is that? What are you talking about? It means nothing to them. Now, input validation, output encoding, those things mean something to them. And that's problem one, is we have a huge gap when it comes to the terminology,
Language.
the language that we're using to describe these things. We're describing the problem, not the solution.
This is Breaking Down Security, and I'm Brian Brake. Welcome back, listener. This is Brian and Mr. Betcher for Breaking Down Security.
Hello.
Oh, man. So I wanted to get the podcast started because we were doing some prep with our guest this week, who is, you might know him if you went to DerbyCon this year. He gave a talk entitled The Care and Feeding of Developers. His name is Bill Sempf. I said it right, I think. Thank you. All right. So, Bill, I want to get into this because I think a lot of us InfoSec people have, our own stories from the trenches where we are all thinking, we got this vulnerability and we got devs who are, not understanding why we need to patch something. So I wanted to get a quick intro from you to find out who you are and what you do, and then we can start talking about this.
Sure. So my name is Bill Sempf, and I am a developer, and I have been the security guy on the dev team for a long, long time. Back in '99, I was the webmaster still am the webmaster technically for an organization called TMCI.net, and we had an NT4 server that paged me at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night saying that his hard drive was full. And when I went there to find out what was wrong, I found out it was full of German porn, and I didn't know why. And the reason, of course, is that it had been broken into, and I didn't even know that was possible at the time. I knew there was computer security bits, but I didn't really give any thought to it. But it became a minor crusade for me, and ever since then, I've been focused on it. So all this time, I've been in the dev space, through the Unix side of things and the Windows side of things, and into the .NET framework and through service-oriented architecture, and really security has been my focus all along. Finally, in 2010, I just gave up and hung out the shingle that said, I'm going into security full time, and not really hanging up my developer cleats, but am sidelining them temporarily to focus on security. And that's where I've been recently, is trying to nail down the divide between the InfoSec community and the development community, which is not an easy thing to do.
No, we are two definitely different beasts, if you will. So, Mr. Betcher's here. How you doing, Mr. Betcher?
I'm doing good.
Awesome.
Real good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, since I did the intro there, you got a question for Bill? We'll get you started with Bill first on the questions.
Okay. So I have a little bit of a developer background as well.
Excellent.
And one issue that I've had with development and development managers is if you have a vulnerability in an application and you take it to development and say, we have a problem with this code, we need to fix whatever, and they say, well, you know what, why don't you prove it's a problem and then maybe I'll fix it, right? How can I, as a security guy, approach development in a better way to help them understand that this is a problem and needs to be fixed?
So you're working against a history is part of the problem. We have now, over the last 7 years or so, in the InfoSec community, we've burned the bridge to dev, and they've had. I seriously don't know a coder who hasn't had that wonderful feeling of their dev manager disappearing for a half day because it's audit time and coming back with a binder of stuff that needs to be fixed that's written. I mean, may as well be written in Greek. I mean, it makes no sense. It's got a bunch of code that I didn't write in it, and I don't know where that code came from because it's the HTTP requests and responses that have gone back and forth between servers that my framework handles for me. I don't look at those. I don't know why that session ID isn't random. I don't know why this value isn't encoded properly, and I have no idea what XSS is. What are you even talking about? There's a language divide that's causing a problem, and we've now burned it so hard as an infosec group, as an infosec community, that we've got the attitude problem now. When you go to the devs, even if you've got your best intentions in mind, hey, listen, there's an actual problem here. I've tested this. I know that session IDs can be stolen. We've got to fix this cross-site scripting vulnerability. The devs say, so what really can be taken here? I mean, really, one user's ID? Who cares? Go find somebody who cares, because I don't. I've got users to take care of. The people who are paying the bills. Why are you bothering me with this? Honestly, if we'd started 7, 8, 9 years ago when this became an issue, if we'd started with a little bit more friendly, a little bit more approachable attitude, had this AppSec attitude in mind, it would have been easier. But now we've got to go and patch things up. So yeah, it's on us. The onus is on us as security people. I'm going to use us for devs and us for security. I'm sorry, because I have a foot in each side, and so it's hard to remember which one I'm being at any given time. The onus is on information security to actually show that the vulnerability is a problem. It isn't enough to take your app scan report and throw it on the dev manager's desk and say, hey, fix these things. It's okay. There's only 1,150 of them.
Yeah.
That's simple. I mean, honestly, if we built a better relationship, built a better bridge up front, we might have been able to pull something like that off today, but we didn't. So now there's a bunch of distrust. And so it's on us to triage now. We have to compress the vulnerabilities into a single instance with a list of files. We've got to show that DOM cross-site scripting that AppScan is so certain is there actually is there by exploiting it. We need to be able to run the QA version on our local instance and test against that. We've got to get more involved in the application development process.
What you're saying is I have to be a pen tester as well as a vulnerability manager.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Well, you don't know, but somebody does. Someone has to be able to manage the application vulnerability environment on your team. Mm-hmm. Go to dev or QA and poach the most security sensitive person on the team and make them the person on your group that does that testing, that checks that stuff. Someone who can be the liaison. And depending on the size of your organization and the political structure, that may be extraordinarily difficult. I realize that. It might be impossible, in fact, and I know that. But in a I don't want to say a best case scenario, but in a good scenario, that's what would happen is you grab a QA person or a dev who has security leanings and say, hey, I need someone who can touch both sides here. And honestly, I've seen places where the person is still a full-time dev and they're just the security guy on the dev team. And that works out fine, especially in smaller shops. It works out great. In really big shops, you're going to need someone to play that role. Application security architect. I'm doing air quotes. I don't know if there's video. But in a big shop, you've got to have somebody sit in that role. In a really big shop, you might have a team, but that's might be overkill.
So
Someone who can go and do that checking.
I agree with you. You can't slap 1,500 vulns on dev. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Right.
But I think, like you said, establishing those relationships early on to get development on board with what you're trying to do and the value you provide by highlighting these vulnerabilities and all that is pretty valuable.
No, it's not. It's not anyone's fault. I don't want to make it sound like, InfoSec was being a jerk as a community, or as a platform. No one understood how bad AppSec's role was in all of this. No one understood how easy it was going to be to take over everything inside of an organization using the forward-facing applications that a company puts forth. No one realized that going in. When we started building internet applications in what really, when it became popular, maybe 94, 95, no one had any idea what we were dealing with here. And even the early attacks were all defacements. They were all, virtual bricks thrown through virtual windows. And nobody was really looking at, hey, you know what? We've got some dynamic code that's touching our core databases. And if somebody were to find a way to exploit flaws, they could really do damage, until we got around 2001, 2002, and then things got bad real fast. And so there was panic. And that panic led to a lot of yelling, basically. Fix this. I don't know what to fix. Fix this. And that's what led to the schism between dev and InfoSec.
So before the podcast, we talked about the language barrier, if you will.
Yeah.
We call them vulnerabilities. Developers call them defects. How do we make a vulnerability into a defect? How do we say, okay, I know we talked a little bit about the cross-site scripting, and it's not really called cross-site scripting for developers. It's called, would you call it content?
Well, so cross-site scripting is still cross-site scripting. It's a terrible name because that's not what it is anymore. But it's still that attack is still that attack.
Mm-hmm.
That vulnerability is still that vulnerability. That exploit is still that exploit. It's viewing it from the perspective of the person who has to fix it. So the developer isn't fixing cross-site scripting; they're fixing output encoding.
Hmm.
Okay, so the way you make sure that cross-site scripting can't happen is by making sure that all anything that's sent to a client under any circumstances is encoded properly, whether it be in the HTML, in the CSS, in the JavaScript. Please don't do dynamic JavaScript. If any devs are listening, don't do that, please. But if it happens, you have to encode it properly. So if the encoding is there, cross-site scripting doesn't occur. And that's the problem. The defect is insufficient output encoding. That's the defect.
Yeah.
The vulnerability is still cross-site scripting, but that means nothing to the coders. And at OWASP, we're running around with our hair on fire, screaming, waving our hands, saying, learn about cross-site scripting. But really, what we have to get across is, encode your outputs. Trust no data, even data in your own database, encode your outputs.
Okay. So, I mean, that's, so instead of OWASP top 10 having, SQL injection and cross-site scripting, should OWASP start trying to rename these vulnerabilities to be more developer friendly? Because application security is more of a developer centric kind of deal. Shouldn't they be writing those more towards the developer instead of the InfoSec person?
I am so glad you asked me that. I'm so glad, because the answer is no.
A what?
The answer is no, with a caveat.
You're killing
The OWASP top 10 is very important because it draws attention to application vulnerabilities for InfoSec people who are coming from the risk, policy, network side. They look at these vulnerabilities of applications and go, whoa, that's a vulnerability. That's high risk. That's important. The OWASP top 10 is not for devs and never has been, really. There are people who would argue that point, but it's true. However, there is a new project called the OWASP Proactive Controls. And it is, and everybody gets serious and looks at their keyboards for a minute.
Google it.
The OWASP Proactive Controls is a top 10 list of what developers need to do to prevent the OWASP top 10. And actually, I just, if I can, go off on a tangent here for a second, just a short second, I gave a presentation to one of my clients who was all in on cybersecurity month in October. They did a bunch of training and a social engineering exercise where they took pictures of workstations that were unlocked, and it was I don't want to mention them on the podcast, but the person who did the work, and if you're listening, you know who I'm talking about, did a amazingly phenomenal job putting this together and got the whole company involved, and everybody was into it. While he was doing all the fun stuff with the rest of the company, like the lockpicking competition and the social engineering competition, all this stuff, I had all the devs in a Google Hangout with the new Google On Air Hangout, which I'd never played with before.
Yep.
You've seen those before? Okay,
Oh, yeah.
I'd never seen that before. And I presented Jim Manico's slides, which are phenomenal, on the proactive controls, and did his talk on it. So there is a YouTube video of him giving it in somewhere in Europe. I don't know exactly where. And there's also a YouTube video, as it turns out, of me giving exactly the same slides, but with my much less sophisticated outlook on life as Manico. So there's stuff out there. I'm sure there's others as well.
Okay.
But so the OWASP proactive controls are designed to do exactly what you just said. They are the developer side of things. So A1 is parameterize your queries. Why? Because SQL injection, even though it's shrinking every year, it's an end game vulnerability. If you have SQL injection in your application,
game over.
I will steal your database.
Yep.
Done.
Yep.
And it's the end of the conversation. So, and then we go on from there. We go on to validating inputs and encoding outputs, and even on to things like understanding your third-party controls, so you can make sure you have an update policy and whatnot. That is the developer side of the OWASP top 10.
That's awesome. No, I like that. I'm actually looking at it right now. That'll be in our show notes. I might actually use this instead of. See, the thing is, though, if we're trying to talk to developers, should we not be using developer tools or developer terms so that we, you don't walk up to a dude in, say, China and try to speak English to him. He's not going to understand you. You got to at least learn a little bit of Chinese so that you can get your point across.
Yes, exactly. That's exactly right. And the other project you're talking about, the ASVS, it differs very much. The ASVS is very much a requirement. It's a business analysis tool. The OWASP proactive controls are a developer-focused tool. This is about things you need to be thinking about every day when you're writing code. You know, when you take that input and you need to move it to a user viewable mechanism of some kind, wherever it is, you think to yourself, what kind of encoding needs to happen here every time?
Yeah.
That's not something devs need to do. In the past, they haven't thought about that in the past. They thought, what do I have to do to make it show up on the screen? How do I make it look right? But not, how do I make sure that an attacker can't exploit some ability to pass a command into whatever viewing mechanism the user is using that I didn't intend? That's not what devs think about. So for a long time at OWASP, we're thinking, well, we'll teach them about cross-site scripting and they'll learn. So we say, oh, look, it's cross-site scripting. If you don't do your output encoding, this is what happens. And about a third of the developers went, holy cow, look at that. I had no idea, and went and fixed things. And 2/3 went, man, that must stink. I'm sure glad that doesn't happen to my apps, and went back to work.
Yeah. Yep.
We weren't being direct enough. And so now we are.
That's
Now
cool.
it's okay, we're not cutting corners here. You must encode your outputs to prevent cross-site script. You must parameterize your queries on every query. Think, well, it's just this little report screen that I've done on the side where you can search for a report. It's okay if I concatenate together that SQL. No, it's not. No, it's not. I'm going to find that, and so will the attacker. So you can't do that.
Well, that's cool. That's a PDF download of those proactive controls.
Indeed.
It would be nice maybe if you could map those to all the findings, because there's more than just 10 of the OWASP web vulnerabilities.
Yes.
There's a lot. So I don't know if all 10 of the ones in the proactive controls will cover everything, all the CWEs. So that would, yeah. So you, on your blog post, which is the one that actually got me to wanting you to come on,
Excellent.
you talk a lot about automating testing.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because one, there's just not enough time in the day to have eyes on, hands on kind of thing. So you're looking at the 80-20 rule in this respect, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's no question that, for one thing, application testing is an extraordinary complex topic. I mean, it's even as a developer writing the code and trying to test against the business logic. So we write unit tests. So every atomic function we write, so a function to do something like a credit to an account and debit from another account. So we have 2 unit tests that cover that determine whether or not the credit function does what we expect and the debit function does what we expect. Well, then we have to figure out if the account number we're passing in is valid for the logged in user. There almost never is a unit test written for that, right? So even there, the testing problem is an extraordinarily difficult problem to solve. But then you lean over onto pure vulnerability testing, and you look at things like, let's see, we have a 4-part testing scenario. Half of it is dynamic testing, where we're testing the running application, and we've got a huge number of applications need to be tested and looked at on a regular basis, and a limited amount of human talent to do that work. So many people look at these application scanners, and I keep picking on IBM AppScan, which I shouldn't do, because there's a lot of them out there and of varying levels of good, and good for different kinds of applications at different times. But AppScan is so easy to say. I use it all the time, so just bear with me on this. So they look at AppScan and they say, but it's going to produce a report that's just, loads and loads and loads of false positives, and it isn't useful for my devs, and it isn't useful for me. And then it gives me a bunch of stuff that isn't really a problem, and I have to either clear it or convince the devs to fix it. Sorry. Still, we're in a place where we've got so much code to test that the focus should be on honing down the rules that we have on AppScan to actually focus on the things that dynamic scanners do well when they're automated, and then let the pen testers handle the segment of stuff they do separately on the dynamic side. So we've got this running where we have the dynamic scanning run, and it's producing reports that are actually useful, and it's a limited number of vulnerabilities, and it's a focused rule set that makes sense for things that a computer can find, right? Like encryption flaws and uniqueness and encoding and things that a computer can find well. And then we'll let the pen testers find the stuff they're good at on the dynamic side. Take care of their time, because I mean, they've got 2 weeks a year and the attackers have all year, right?
Sure.
Then we switch over and we look at the static side. And on the static side, we're looking directly at the code, and we have some codes, some static code scanner, which developers all hate because they're so often used as style checkers, are using tabs instead of spaces, and what version of printf are you using, and oh my god, everybody hates them. And then we have code reviews, like Glasstop code reviews, where we, just another developer looks over your shoulder and says, what's this function do? What's that one do? Why aren't they combined? Why did you use an overload? The static scanners, they can find certain things well if we reduce the rule set to those things that static scanners actually find well, and then run it on a regular basis, every QA build, every time we send something to UAT, whatever. I mean, whatever the pattern is, even if we're running it in the sandbox and letting the developers handle the flaws as they come in, the defects as they come in, one at a time. They get a red squiggly, just like they used an outdated function call. They get they get a red squiggly for a possible DOM cross-site scripting sync in their JavaScript, and they have to look at it and go, oh no, that's not a problem, and mark it. Let the automated scanning do what it does well, and then keep the humans' time down to just what the humans do well, and that's all. Conserve the humans' time. Let the scanners do let the automated tools do what they do well, and then conserve the humans' time. And that's the focus on that.
Yeah.
Do you give the humans the output of the automated tools to review, or do you try to keep them separate and say, okay, you focus on just these particular things like logic flaws or whatever it is?
So that depends on your environment. The sophistication of your developers matters here. So on a project I'm on right now, I've got 12 applications, right, that I'm responsible, that my team's responsible for, the three of us. I've got one team that is running our static scanner in sandbox mode, and it's fixing applications in Eclipse fixing vulnerabilities in Eclipse as they happen. So we ran I just blew it. I said the.
We'll block that. We'll block.
Sorry. We ran the scanner, and they fixed the vulnerabilities, and then as they're writing new code, as new red squigglies show up, they fix them just like they fix the things that the compiler throws up, right? But then we've got other teams that are a little bit more on the defect resolution side. So it's more about taking, hey, we've got 36 HTML injection flaws. So we're going to put that in a defect in Jira called HTML injection, or called HTML encoding maybe. And then we're going to list the 36 files that have to be fixed in the ticket, put the ticket in, and the defect resolution team will handle it in the next cycle, next sprint. It really depends on where your teams are at. I don't know. I'm not sure if that even helps, but the problem is that doing this resolution requires a certain amount of understanding of how the developers work. You can't just enforce your schedule over theirs. You can try all you want, but it's not going to work. They've got a pattern. And whether it be a traditional waterfall, quote unquote, style of long-term development with documentation, or it's the newer agile 2 to 4 week cycle where things get spread out in weird ways and the business has to make priority decisions, and whether you call something a feature or a defect matters. No matter what, someone on the security side has to have insight into how the developers view the problem. And that's kind of key there. And that's why I mentioned, go and find someone on the dev team or on the QA team with security leanings and adopt them.
Well,
Poach them if you can.
also the security people have to have insight into deployment schedules and stuff, because you can't just
Oh.
be dropping security vulnerabilities, or I have a cross-site scripting feature on the website. I called it a feature.
Yeah.
You can't be dropping that just as they're about to go to deployment or into prod, because then they're gonna be like, well, that's not gonna get fixed,
Right.
and then
So
your timetables have got to be the same. And of course, in development, they also have to allow you time to do the security testing to make sure that, the 80-20 rule, you're getting that other 20%, or you're getting as close to the 20% as possible. And you're not optional. Documentation may be optional in Agile or in Waterfall, but security testing cannot be considered optional for deployment.
That's exactly right. And a lot of organizations run into the problem. I've seen this in 10 or 15 places here in the past couple of years, where security vulnerabilities get relegated to feature status. So the business has to make a priority decision. They look and say, oh, okay, do I want this new flashing spinning logo, or do I want to fix this UI redress problem? Well, I can't even spell redress, so I'll take the logo. And then the next sprint, same problem. Next sprint, same problem. And then next year, you get the pen test report and it's got the same vulnerability. That's a big issue that people are looking at now. So looking at the vulnerabilities as defects rather than as a set of requirements later is after deployment, right, is key. But you hit the nail on the head. Understanding deployment schedules is as key to understanding the development process in general. Right now, here we are sitting November 2nd. Well, when we're recording this, November 2nd.
Yeah.
Anybody who's working retail, we're looking at freeze anytime now.
Yep.
You're toast. If you're picking now to fix your SSL v3 problems or your session randomness problems, you get to wait till February, buddy. Sorry.
Or worse, you waited until now to try to patch Oracle for your databases.
Gosh.
That's not going to happen.
Oh my goodness gracious! Yes, patching. I mean, or jQuery.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
jQuery. You run into people that run in jQuery. 181. It's wow. We can't be doing that. But it's too late. I mean, you can't fix it now.
Yeah.
Because there's no way the devs can put those features into. See, I said features. I know they're defects, but still, you put that in play. You're not going to get it deployed and have it be bug free in time for people to shop. And so you just get to wait, and that's just the way it is. So it's a two-way street. Yes, I understand. There's a potential for the risk is high, potentially very high. Obviously, if the risk is extremely high, I mean, if you've got a massive blind SQL injection flaw, you're going to have to break things and fix it because someone's going to find that. But if you're looking at these mid-range, medium to high kind of flaws, like the DOM cross-site scripting pieces like that, you're probably going to end up waiting till February, and that's just the way it is. Yeah. Deployment schedules matter.
Yep.
So in the proactive controls, I was looking through those while you guys were discussing.
Yeah, I wasn't really listening. I was just over here doing my own
exactly
thing. Yeah. Okay.
No, it's quiz time.
implement logging and intrusion detection. How do you implement intrusion detection?
So when developers write logging, we are 100% focused on getting that call at 9:30 p.m. on a Saturday when the site goes down. That's all we care about, because we've all had that call. And we know, I mean, anybody with more than 7 years experience in dev knows that when they are writing the key pieces of the functionality of the site or any application, mobile application, a client server app, you start to naturally log things that you know you're going to need when your boss calls at 9:30 p.m. on Saturday after you've had 3 beers and says, "Hey, site's down. What do you want me to do?" And of course, you have no clue why. Is the internet provider working? I mean, the server, is it blue smoke or gray smoke? I mean, you have no idea what's going on, but you know that if it's the app's fault, you need to make sure you're logging things that make sense. Part of the proactive controls strategy was to adjust the devs' thinking a little bit to say, okay, so this isn't about the phone call at 9:30. It isn't just about the phone call at 9:30 p.m. on Saturday. This is also about 3 months later when the FBI calls and says, "Hey, your database has been stolen. We have it here. Can we maybe look back at your records and find out why?" And you go, well, I've got my IS logs. And they go, well, do you have anything else? Because I'd really love to see what records are being passed. So a lot of developers are, I mean, in today's era, well, today, last 10 years really of SOA, we're like, well, dude, it's all service oriented. I'm just going to store every service call, request and response. I'll just store it. Storage space is cheap. I'll just store everything. Well, but that's no good because then you're storing everything. You're storing session IDs, credentials. You're storing permit account numbers. You're storing everything, right? You're storing things you can't store. So there has to be some balance there. And if you find the balance, that balance point lives at the IDS space. And you find that your logging will actually tell you if something is flawed. If you're under attack with some flaw in your application. So for instance, let's say I've got a form where I'm collecting a social security number and my JavaScript on the client side in the browser prevents you from typing anything other than a number in those fields. If my services are recording strings being passed in, which my input validation is blocking, I know I'm under attack.
Yeah.
Because that means the person entering those values is not using a browser, which is how we know, right? They're using an attack proxy or a script.
Yep.
So we know we're under attack. That's where that leads. That idea of using logging as an intrusion detection system. That's where that leads eventually.
Very cool. Yep.
Nice.
You just kind of played into Mr. Betcher's hand because that's kind of his thing now. So
excellent.
Yeah. Yes, LogMD is his baby, so he's, he likes that whole logging thing, so it's important for him.
So this is the SEIM, right? Security something intrusion something. No, what is it? The
event management.
Yes, indeed. Isn't that where we're putting everything into a central logging repository and then making decisions later based on what we found out, or real time, I suppose.
Yeah.
That's where we'd like the coders to be eventually, is looking not just to Saturday night at 9:30, but feeding that database. So if we have to look back a month later and figure out how someone got in, we can. That's the goal, without storing everything, every request, every response, which is what a lot of people, I mean, you'd be surprised. I've got 4 clients currently that are literally storing everything and now have base business processes on them and won't stop.
Well, are they required by some kind of compliance framework to do that, or is it just something they've decided they do?
No, they did it because security kept harping on them to store things, so they did. They stored everything.
Nice. So there's an example of going beyond just compliance to security.
Excellent.
Well, I think the point is that they just went too far because they didn't have the important security didn't have those conversations to let them know exactly what was needed. Not, saying just we need to log everything just because. You need to have the conversation, and you need to do the research into what needs to be logged.
The core thing you have to remember is that good developers are lazy by nature. Don't laugh. It's not a joke. Seriously, the more lazy a coder is, the better they are, because I automate away my own work, right? I look at something and say, I'm not going to do this conversion again. Screw this. I'm going to write something to do it. But if it doesn't have to be written, I'm not going to write it. So you want me to store interactions? Fine. I will pipe the requests and responses to a file. Done. 3 lines of code. There, we're compliant. And then you go, well, wait, don't give me well, wait. You said log things. I'm logging. What's your problem? So the idea of a logging framework has to come into the conversation here somewhere. And on the security side, we've got all these super fancy repositories that store them, that accept them. They have these great APIs, but nobody's telling the developer story and going and saying, hey, here's how your application can communicate exactly what's supposed to be in here, but nothing else. As it turns out, that's way harder than it sounds to do.
Yeah. And that's just that's just more building bridges. You got to generate that culture in your company. So it takes time. We've had other people on the podcast like Martin Fisher, not to name drop or anything, who's talked about creating that culture of,
my buddy Marty, right?
Big M, yeah. But he's talked about being a speed, not a guardrail instead of a speed bump to development or to building.
Yes, fantastic.
Yes, yeah. So, wow, that was awesome. Is there any other takeaways, Mr. Betcher, that you'd like to come to this? I've actually learned a bunch of stuff that I didn't know, but the proactive security controls, that's fantastic. I didn't even know that existed. I think we'll have you back next week to talk about the ASVS, because that was another one of your blog posts. Indeed. So I definitely want to have you on for that. So before we go, Mr. Betcher, what did you think about this?
Well, I think it's great that and you brought some really good points. Just having the conversations with development and knowing how they work, how they think, and getting them on board early on. Speaking their language, insufficient output encoding, that kind of thing. Putting it in terms that they understand. And I think that's really key.
Yeah. So, okay, one last thing before I have one question that came up. So let's say you are in a broken environment where you've got, you've got the antagonistic, you can't talk to devs don't understand what you're saying. What would be step one for somebody to come back tomorrow and go, I want to start talking to my developers? What is step zero in this case, because coders talking zeros, to get that started, to get that dialogue started?
So the best thing I've had to do is go in and have a fun vulnerability assessment style training program. So, hey, look at this cool crap you can do online breaking applications. Let's look at, let's look at Security Shepherd or the Bodget Store out of Zap or something. One of these purposefully vulnerable web applications. Let's purposefully break them. Let's go in and steal crap. Look, hey, there's a 39,000 line Python script out there we can use to download the entire database. Watch me do it. Isn't this cool? This is neat stuff. Let's look at the code underlying this. Isn't this cool? This is cool stuff. Right. This is the stuff that the attackers are doing to our application. Haha. What do you think of that? Where do you want to go next with this, folks? Because we got to move somewhere. Where do you want to go next? You will find that a handful of people will go, I had no idea. This is fantastic. Where can I do more of this? Those are those are the centers of your offensive line. That's the person who can be the bridge between infosec and dev. And you take that person, you groom them, and you give them OWASP tools. You send them to your local OWASP chapter, and you get them set up. It requires management insight, management approval. You've got to get things up and rolling, but that's the goal. Find that bridge person or a couple of bridge people. Could be QA, could be dev, but find that person and get them in place.
Very cool. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on to talk about your blog post,
My
and
pleasure.
I think we'll have you back next week to talk about ASVS. So Bill can be found on Twitter at Sempf, SEMPF. You can also find his blog, sempf.net, SEMPF.net. We also have a video to the DerbyCon talk he gave in our show notes. Thanks again, Bill, and we'll talk to you again soon.
My pleasure.
Bye-bye.